3. Charles Kennedy, MP for Ross, Skye and Lochaber. As well as being a former leader of the party, Charles is president of the UK European Movement.
Duncan, thank you very much. And you know, I was just sitting there thinking as I was listening to Angelica and all success for your campaign and the other candidates we heard from. We really do give value for money in this party, you know. There was Danny Alexander, that's a Freudian slip. Danny Alexander on earlier this afternoon. Now you've got me. You've got 2 Highland ginger rodents for the price of 1 all in one afternoon. Now, look. Europe is part of the DNA of this cause, our movement, this party. In the 1950s, a handful of Liberal MPs divided that House of Commons, the entire House of Commons against them, on the issue of Europe. In the 70s, Jenkins led that decisive split within the Parliamentary Labour Party and backed Heath over membership of the Common Market, a move which helped lead to the SDP, which led on to the Alliance, and here we are today as the Liberal Democrats. It is part of our DNA. But I have to be honest with you, and I have to take blame for this as well, being in position at the time. Even as leader, I found it hugely frustrating when it came to campaigns, because all too often in my experience, DNA stood for do not acknowledge where Europe is concerned. Talk about everything else, campaign and everything else, but for God's sake, Charles, get off your obsession with Europe. Don't spend too much time talking about that. Well, we can't make that mistake at these coming elections and the referendum that might lead on. We can't make that mistake. Because the chips are down as never before on the European issue in British politics, and a lot of the responsibility now rests with us. Why? Look at David Cameron's position. An absolutely ill-judged commitment given during the Tory leadership election has led to the utter marginalisation of his own Tory British MEPs in Europe. If that's what he can do with his ill judgment on Europe to his own people, what in the name of God would he do to the interests long-term of our country in Europe with his ill-judged commitments on the referendum issue? That's why we're correct in saying that you have a referendum if there's a treaty change, but you don't have a referendum running scared of UKIP and Nigel Farage, who was, and it's not an original to me, but brilliantly described as a politician with more than an air of the 19th hole about him, which said a great deal. But secondly, and you might be surprised to hear me say this, the Prime Minister I blame most of all for the predicament in which this country's politics now find themselves over Europe is not Margaret Thatcher, it's Tony Blair. Because Blair was the man who had the ball at his feet in the early days of his premiership to lance the European boil for once and for all. And what did he do? First, he ran scared of Rupert Murdoch. What a political miscalculation. And then he ran scared of Gordon Brown. How politically ludicrous was that? Ed Miliband is going to be in a long train of Labour leaders, utterly expedient where Europe is concerned. My experience over Iraq was this, and history gets distorted and memories are short. When we took the decision we did over Iraq, it wasn't popular. The opinion polls were actually showing a majority willing to give Blair the benefit of the doubt over Iraq. We were isolated as a party in Parliament and outside in terms of public opinion. And I was worried that we might have made a terrible error in that it would have sunk the fortunes of our party, particularly when our forces went in and if everything had proved to be much more successful than it was. Although we'd have stuck to it because it was the right thing to do. What that episode proved to me was that you can take a distinct position, which isn't necessarily popular with everybody, but marks you out, and people can recognise your sincerity and your honesty and make a case that none of the others are prepared to make. Now, that's our responsibility next year at these European elections. We can forget UKIP, we can forget the Tories, we can forget Labour. If the voice of rational pro-Europeanism is going to be heard, there's only one place it can come from, and it should be us, and it will be us. We are debating policies here this week where we're acknowledging unpopularity, things that we don't necessarily like, items that we've had to swallow, but we're doing it for the greater good. Well, for God's sake, on Europe, this is one that we believe in. This is one that is part of our DNA. This is what we should be passionate about. And if it makes us unpopular in certain quarters, let's be unpopular for what we care about and what we believe in and what defines us and what we think is best for our country. I'm happier to be unpopular for that than I am for some of the things that we're having to swallow as a result of the age of austerity in which we live. Let's go forward with these elections. Front foot, unequivocal, pro-Europe. Britain needs to hear it, Europe needs it, and we believe it. Let's go for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.